Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon, Lauri. Good night, probably, Renato. First of all, on behalf of Arq.Futuro and Porquê, I'd like to thank you to each and everyone to stay with us on this online seminar within the scope of green economic recovery, international experience, and Brazil facing the challenge of climate change, the China experience. As you can see, we will have simultaneous translations, Brazilian language signal, and live broadcast. Unfortunately, Carolina Matar is not able to be here due to health issues. I'm Ricardo Mil Homens, director of Porquê, a platform developed by Bay Group, created in 2015 to translate economics so that a wider part of the Brazilian population could understand and amplify the public debate. The platform has the green economy as one of its strategic agendas, fundamental to think about the future of Brazil. That is the main reason for joining the co-organizer of this initiative, BEI, Arq.Futuro, IDS, and Insper, by the supporting of Itaú Unibanco. Through a series of four seminars, the aim of our project is to learn from challenge experience in the world in view of proposing a specific strategy for Brazil. Last week, we had the first seminar, The Case of Chile, by the Minister of Environment of the country, Carolina Schmidt, as a speaker, which video and document of it are available at project's website. Today, we will have the second online seminar, The Chinese Experience on Green Economic Recovery. China has the biggest investment in renewable energy in the world, and it has been stimulating the technological innovation as a way of aligning economic development with carbon neutrality. However, the magnitude and trajectory of Chinese carbon emissions still threaten global efforts and represent a challenge to fight global warming. Last October, China updated its NDS, the nationally determined contribution of Paris Agreement, setting ambitious targets to all points it had previously committed to, as well as adding the carbon neutrality target before 2060. Among other things, China's updated the NDC states to reach its peak emissions before 2030, to reduce the intensity of carbon dioxide per unit of GDP by at least 65% of 2005 values, to increase the share of non-fossil fuel energy to around 25% of primary energy consumption, and to increase forest stock by 6 billion cubic meters, 7 from 2005 levels. The country has also made efforts to encourage the low carbon economy with policies to stimulate vehicular electrification and large investments in renewable energy. As all of us know, since 2020, the COVID 19 pandemic caused deep socioeconomic impacts and recession all over the world, stagnating economies and retracting projects. From this seminar, knowing deeply about China innovation experience, we intend to achieve a big goal to propose guidelines for Brazil establish its own green economic recovery strategy after pandemic. Concerning the concept that climate change is much more than only an environment issue, we would like to see development options with the participation of Brazil politicians and experts on these topics, as there will be general elections in October, and we want to present these subjects to the new government. Together, our organizations share the idea of recovering the Brazilian economy in a sustainable way with social and environmental responsibility. But we do not intend to make it alone. That is why we had invited special speakers from Chile, China, France, and the United States of America to share with us their experience. To continue our event as a mediator. Now I invite Mr. Guilherme Checo, IDS Research Coordinator. Please.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Good morning, good evening, good night for everyone who are watching our virtual seminar. I'm Guilherme Checo, Research Coordinator from Instituto Democracia e Sustentabilidade, Democracy and Sustainability Institute, a think tank that works with the social environmental agenda in our Brazilian public policies. First of all, I would like to explain for everyone, we're doing this seminar all in English with simultaneous translation. So we're having two broadcast links, one in IDS China channel on YouTube and the other one on Porquê's YouTube channel. Well, here doing this mediation process here in our virtual seminar, I'll start presenting our speakers and our commentator special guest here, so we can start our seminar. First of all, we're here with Lauri Myllyvirta. Lauri, please, after you can say if I pronounced correctly your name. Lauri is the lead analyst at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, an organization focused on research related to public health impacts on air pollution. Lauri, here with us today, has a master in political science with more than 10 years of experience in issues related to climate change and air pollution. Lauri has also worked at Greenpeace during the period of 2017 to 2019, also focusing on air pollution. And also, I thank here the presence of Renato Roldão, our second speaker, special guest. Renato Roldão is the Vice-president and Managing Director at the ICF Climate Center, a consultancy that works in the areas of technology and public policy. At ICF, Renato has also served as Senior Director for Climate Change and Transition to Clean Energies. Renato has also a PhD in Sustainability and Sustainable Energy Systems and a Master's in Economics, Energy, and Environment, with more than 18 years of professional experience in the areas of climate change, energy, and environment. And at least, but not less important, here we have also our special guest that will make some comments during our debate session, Professor Eduardo Viola. Eduardo Viola is PhD in political science from the University of São Paulo. Also, he's this senior research at the Institute of Advanced Studies, also at USP, University of São Paulo, and full professor of the postgraduate program in international relations at the University of Brasilia, and also professor at the School of International Relations at Fundação Getúlio Vargas, FGV. All of them presented. Now I gave the floor for Lauri to do his initial statement, initial presentation during 15 to 20 minutes. Lauri, you have the floor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We at CREA have been tracking China's emissions, China's progress in its clean energy transition for the 3 years that we've been in operation. And it's been an exciting period, definitely, because of the dramatic developments in emissions and because of all the policy making that has taken place. So overall, as you know, China is by far the world's largest emitter of CO2 from energy. the rise in China's emissions in the past 2 decades has been meteoric, has been explosive. Also, since we're talking about green recovery here, China's recovery initially wasn't very green. So the very sharp rise that you're seeing in China's emissions here started in the beginning of the previous decade with China's accession to the World Trade Organization. It was first an export boom, but soon turned into a construction boom. So China's government reacted to the 2007 financial crisis with an infrastructure stimulus, starting a huge amount of road construction, railway, industrial projects to stimulate the economy. And that became basically a permanent feature of China's economic policy, a very high reliance on construction. Then in 2013, there was an attempt to, a push to exit the stimulus and try to shift to what was called the economic new normal. At the same time, there was a huge public concern among decision makers about air pollution. There was a war declared on air pollution. There was a clampdown on industrial overcapacity and on coal power overcapacity. And that's the period that you're seeing here when China's emissions were flat or even fell for several years. But then from 2017 onwards, we've seen another rise in China's emissions. So the reduction in steel output, coal output, and so on turned out to be hard to manage in terms of the economy, the financial system, and especially the political economy. A new wave of stimulus was started. A contributing factor was the trade war with the United States, and then the initial reaction to the negative economic shock caused by the 2020 COVID lockdown was another wave of construction that drove this dramatic spike in China's emissions that you're seeing. So China was the only major emitter that increased its emissions in 2020 and then had a very sharp increase in 2021. However, in the past 3 quarters, starting from last summer, China's emissions have been coming down, and a part of this is the government's clamp down on real estate speculation and an attempt to cool down the real estate sector. In the past few months, there has also been a new round of COVID-19 lockdowns. So that's causing a short-term drop in emissions, and now we have to see what China's next recovery will look like. When China's recovery from the initial lockdowns was happening and when emissions were surging domestically, Xi Jinping made a surprise announcement of aiming to peak China's CO2 emissions before 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. As I said, it was a surprise announcement. Very few people in China knew that this was coming. It was proactive in the sense that it wasn't made together with another major power or in a multilateral setting, and what's notable is that this was a one-sentence announcement. So all the debate and the work on the implementation and the details only started from this announcement. Why would China want to act on climate? Two really key issues for Chinese decision makers are food and water security. Especially food security is something that the Communist Party and the government have emphasized throughout their entire history, and China is one of the most water-stressed countries in the world, so very vulnerable to water-related impacts. China is also surrounded by many countries that are less developed and extremely vulnerable, so climate change can have a major impact on China's security environment. Another major motivation and factor has been air pollution from fossil fuels, especially coal, which has been a major domestic issue especially for the past decade. The climate action aligns with China's energy security goals, which is a major emphasis at the moment. So China has fully domestic supply chains for wind power, solar power, nuclear, high-speed rail, batteries, all the key technologies needed for the zero carbon economy. The low carbon drive is a key part of China's industrial policy. It's clear that the leadership wants to have leadership in the key technologies and the market leadership in the key technologies for the low carbon future. The economic policy also has a long-standing goal of shifting to higher value-added industries and services, which aligns to high-quality growth is the buzzword, which aligns with the long-term aims of the low-carbon transition. The low-carbon goals also align with many foreign policy goals. So establishing China as an important contributor to solving global challenges and also acting as a rule setter and a partner for especially for other developing countries. A couple of words about air pollution. Especially a decade ago, China's industrial heartland, which is the area that surrounds Beijing, was experiencing extremely severe smog episodes after that enormous increase in coal consumption and that you saw in the CO2 emission graph in the beginning. And then in 2013, the Chinese government released a national action plan on air pollution that for the first time set limits on increasing coal consumption and coal-based industrial capacity in the country's key economic regions. It put in place much stronger emission standards for power plants and for industry. And very importantly, it strengthened the monitoring and enforcement of emissions and environmental regulation in a very broad sense. And the results are very impressive. They can be seen from space, from satellites, as you can see in this image. So we can see the particle emission levels falling over the past decade, and especially the sulfur dioxide emissions, which are a key industrial pollutant. And so this drive partially aligned with the CO2 emission reduction goals, and it also created some of the infrastructure, some of the basis for this policy implementation by creating all the regulatory capacity that is needed for this. What will the implementation of China's carbon neutrality goal look like? The very short recipe, if you look at any of the roadmaps published by Chinese institutions, is to electrify everything. So make transport, industry, houses, all the key sectors run on electricity as far as possible, and then produce that electricity from clean sources. To get to carbon neutrality, China has to achieve a zero carbon power sector by 2050. And that requires, of course, a major upfront investment in clean electricity generation. Running the world's largest industrial economy on clean sources, nuclear, solar, and wind in particular, maybe wind, solar, nuclear in that order, sounds like an enormous challenge, and it is. So the capacity of those three key zero carbon technologies needs to increase more than tenfold by 2050. But the good news is that the current scale that China has already achieved is so impressive, so large, that it only needs to approximately double from 2020 level and then stay there in order to get to a fully decarbonized energy system by 2050. And again, that's not just electricity, that's all energy coming from effectively from these three zero carbon sources. And the growth in 2021 and 2022 in wind and solar has been so strong that it looks like that scale might already be achieved this year for those technologies. The key way that China is implementing this goal is known as the 1+N policy framework. There were, of course, this was announced last summer, and there were very high expectations for what this policy framework would look like. I think you can say that it's quite a bit different from what we expected. So that instead of setting a lot of numerical targets for different energy sources and emissions from different sectors and so on, like China's previous action plans have done, the focus in this 5-year period is on creating all the enabling policies and supporting systems that are needed for to realize the long-term goal. You can see the official list of 10 different things here on the slides to build. And it also includes sectoral plans. So there's a plan for hydrogen, there's a plan for steel, a plan for cement, a plan for transportation, and so on. And also importantly, provinces have been making their own plans, and key state-owned enterprises have been making their own plans and targets. So it's really building a bottom-up as well as a top-down plan for the transition. So there's a lot that is happening. The investments in clean energy are growing very fast. And overall, there's a lot of policy making, a huge amount of policy documents that are being issued. At the same time, there's very little specificity about the exact emission pathway that China should follow over the next 10 or even 20 years at the moment. So this really looks like a plan of doing everything that you're prepared to do and seeing how far it takes you, and that of course makes it hard to assess whether the country is on track to this long-term goal. And from a climate perspective, from the perspective of the goal of the Paris Agreement of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, there's a need for more clarity on the short-term emission pathway. We need an urgent peak in China's emissions. One part of the implementation is the so-called clean energy bases. So the central government has designated a list of enormous wind and solar power bases in deserts, in other low productivity um, land areas, and many provinces have designated their own bases. So the coastal provinces have designated offshore wind power. Some other provinces have designated, for example, areas abandoned by coal mines. So basically wasteland left behind by coal mining and so on, which is of course a great way of creating employment in those areas where coal mining is being phased out as well. And this really creates a framework and a system where you can build extremely large amounts of clean energy, and you can plan the transmission. So the transmission lines from these bases to the big demand centers in the coast are being built at the same time as the generating capacity itself is being built. And the scale is impressive. So we project that under these plans, China's renewable energy, China's wind and solar capacity will double in this 5-year period from 2020 to 2025. And that means that in these 5 years, China will add more than 2 times as much wind and solar as the United States has added to date. And compared to other countries, it's of course even a larger gap. And this is the latest statistics on the right-hand side showing the situation in the first 5 months of 2022. And you can see that especially for solar, also for wind, there's a very impressive jump in the additions. So this scale up is in fact happening. Electric vehicles have skyrocketed as well. This year looks like 25% of all automobiles produced in China could be electric. And this is the last slide from me. So of course, this transition is a huge challenge, and there is a lot of resistance. So China's state-owned enterprise sector is very highly dependent on coal, heavy industry such as steel, and so on. And so this transformation is going to be a challenge politically. There are also provinces and cities and regions in China that are very highly dependent on coal in particular. And I think over this 5-year period, the key thing is creating these CO2 peaking and carbon neutrality action plans for all of those state-owned enterprises and all the different provinces, so that they all have identified economic sectors, activities, projects that they can engage in under this carbon neutrality plan, so that they're not only on the losing side of it, and then of course translating that into actual action, and first shifting the investments in new capacity completely into clean energy and zero carbon solutions, which is still a work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauri, for your presentation. I think Lauri has already put some important remarks for us to understand the Chinese experience. But I would like to just remember 2 points that I forgot. First of all, everyone who is watching our virtual seminar can send to us some questions and comments on the YouTube chat. So everyone is invited to do that, and we'll do this question in the proper time. And also to highlight for everyone that all the materials from this project and also the preparatory text for each seminar, they are all available at our seminar site at retomadaVerde.com.br. Now I would like to give the floor for Renato Roldão, Vice-president at the ICF, to share with us a little bit about the Chinese experience. Renato, please.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me for today's session. It's my great pleasure to share with you my experience here in China. And I think it was indeed also very useful in terms of the format to have the presentation that Lauri just did. It was very informative and full of data and statistics that I believe can be very useful for the discussion that will follow. So from my point of view, I will share my experience here in China in a slightly different way. Also, not to repeat some of the good content already shared, but because in the past 14 plus years, I have been based here on a permanent basis, and I started with China back in 2001. So my history of working with China kind of overlaps with the history of China in the World Trade Organization, and so also with the rapid increase in greenhouse gas emissions that was held in one of the slides. And so I have followed that process all the way through. And in that period, I've spent most of my time supporting international organizations like the European Commission or governments like the British government or the Norwegian government in bilateral dialogues, in policy dialogues, and in order also to share best practices and to support the policy design and policy implementation in China in a way that would converge and would help to China to transition faster in terms of the clean energy transition that is necessary in this country, and so the decarbonization pathway. So I'll share with you some of those experiences and also taking into account some of the guiding questions that were shared with us to prepare for this session. So one of the aspects that was asked and about what kind of resistance do we find here? And as Lauri said towards the end of his presentation, there's still lots of resistance. But I personally think that there is less resistance that I would expect in a country that is as large as China and has an emission profile like China. I think that the acceptability of the decarbonization pathway and the clean energy transition pathway, it's quite high these days. Of course, because there will be winners and losers, and there will be requirements in terms of economic transformation, and also impacts in terms of the social transition. It's important, and this is something that, for example, in the dialogue with the European Union, it's a recurrent theme. It's very important that this transition is socially just. So there is an importance in terms of the way that some of the policies are being designed and then implemented here in China, that they are just. And then, for example, when we look at the coal mining areas of China or areas that are highly dependent on coal, it's an area where the government wants to pay particular attention transition to make sure that they are not just losing side, but also try to find ways, try to find strategies, try to find policies and ways to support people in this transition. For example, via reskilling some of them. One project that I was doing with my team in the past, and was related with the British government, was precisely to look at those areas that were more dependent on coal and try to find ways to facilitate that transition. So this is something that in practical terms helps to lower the pockets of resistance, and the resistance where it comes from. It comes not just from specific sectors, but it comes from certain sectors or certain geographical areas of China. So it's a mix. I would say it's a mix of resistance that is lowering down, but still exists. So it can't be ignored, and it's very important. I think in terms of one lesson learned in this process of China decarbonizing is that signaling that, working with those entities that might be more affected and then more resistant, to work with them to support the transition and getting them on their side. So doing that, one strategy that China has used it in the past years, particularly with the energy intensive sectors where the key companies in those sectors are state owned, are public companies. They have done some alliances with those companies, with the big companies in the iron steel sector, in the chemical sector, cement sector, etc., and also with the sectoral associations that represent those energy intensive sectors, and try to engage them, bring them on board as early as possible, so that they are not just the recipient of the policies, but that they are engaged and they are involved early in the process in terms of the design, so that they get a better understanding. They can be seen also as industrial champions that they will help to communicate further down the line to other companies from the same sector what are these policies about, and what are the implications of the implementation. So I think that this is for me, one very important when we talk about where the resistance is coming from. So identifying the problem, but also at the same time trying to have a proactive approach in terms of identifying possible solutions. Because if these policies encounter growing resistance, the capacity to implement them and also for them to be accepted and then successful, it's lower. So I think it's quite important to identify problems, but also come up with some alternative solutions that could tackle them. Then another aspect that is an aspect related with the perception of Chinese people in general regarding these policies, and particularly related with global warming and greenhouse gas emissions. I think that again, from the experience living here, and Lauri also mentioned aspects related with a significant improvement with the air pollution control and air pollution management and air pollution control, and particularly because here in China, the situation was so bad that it caught everyone's attention, and people understand it, and it's something that it's more tangible for them and impacts in their daily lives in a way that it's more visible than the greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that what helps in China also, it's how these policies are educated, so that people get closer to the problem and also get involved in the actions and in implementation of policies in their daily habits and behavioral change that is in line with something that gets closer to them, and that they perceive that also they are part of the problem, but they also the solution. So I feel that over these past years, there is a growing support and increasing perception that greening Chinese economy is the way to go. That would help in the implementation. I think that that in itself, it's not a problem for Chinese government to be more ambitious. So I think that the level of ambition that China wants to put on the table will get support from the general public, from the general public. It's very important that it's communicated in the right way. And with that, I also share an example in some of the cooperation projects that I have been involved with. One of the activities that we have been asked for precisely to commit not only to support the design of the policies, but to support the communication of the policies, the outreach process, to make sure that the message gets out there to non-specialized audiences in a way that is understandable. So I think that it's also very important, because when we are working with these policies, we can have a risk of speaking a language that is too technical, and it's sometimes difficult to explain. So we need to find ways to simplify or to communicate in a way that is perceived on the other side. So I think that's also a very important lesson, and it would help even to change the perception of those that are less receptive to become more receptive over time. Then another aspect related with how people stand behind these measures to address climate change. Sometimes we discuss, because the Paris Agreement and other international agreements and the international matters related with the global policy, whether the actions and the decisions that China is doing in terms of climate action are primarily driven by international environment, or if they are driven by their domestic will and their are domestically driven. I would say that also, as Lauri mentioned in one of the slides, there's a lot of very important reasons for China to drive its climate action based on its domestic interests. So I think that this is, for me, the main driver. Of course, it's very good that exists a Paris Agreement and there are international agreements that China commits and align that and is part of this multilateral regime. This is very important because the success or failure of these policies in China will have a huge impact in the rest of the world. But beyond that, China identified a lot of domestic constraints that are better tackled if China takes decisive action on climate change. So this become an issue of domestic priority, independent of the international agreements. So I think that is also a point of hope in terms of what the future actions might look like. I would like also to, on this, how we have like different priority actions that have been outlined. I would like here to mention something. So it was mentioned that China also for some technological leadership, and we have seen some aspects related with, for example, electrical vehicles that growing in China domestically, but also aiming to be a global champion in the international marketplace. I think also China aims to be a green finance leader in a way that they can bring this new type of finance to drive the IT growth of China that was also mentioned by Lauri, but also to put China in a position to be a lender of the international economy in terms of green finance. China as an initiative, the Belt and Road, and there's some side initiatives also supporting that related with the process of greening the Belt and Road, meaning greening the type of investment that flow through that initiative. And another aspect that relates with the actions is an area where I have been working since 2010. That is the process of designing and implementing an emissions trading system for a greenhouse gas emission reduction trading system. So China started with a ETS pilot a couple years ago, and back back in 2010, before the announcement of the pilots, I was working in a small project that included Brazil, China, and about the possibilities of carbon pricing in these three economies. And then soon after, China announced that they would do a piloting in some areas of China. And so this is an important aspect because the cover sectors of the emissions trading include most of the energy intensive industries, also include aviation. And on the first question that was about, for example, what are sectors that have more resistance? I think there is a level of readiness and technical and political readiness, and also acceptability to the measures. Some of these sectors, let's say if we go from 2010 to date, first they were thinking, oh, okay, this is not for us. Then they say, okay, this is for us when the government tells us explicitly that this is for us and we need to start acting. And now we are getting into a mood that they acknowledge that this is for us, and so they need to start putting effective plans in place to. So this is being now more transformative. Some of the plans that Lauri mentioned in terms of establishing the sectoral plans or establishing the regional plans can be facilitated now, because there is an acknowledgement that this has to be done. So it's something that it has changed, and we see that also the way that the policy develops here in China, as in many other parts of the world, is not a development, is not a linear development. There's a lot of ups and downs, and there are moments where it seems that there's little progress, and then there's followed by another moment where there is a very quick progress, and then some moments where it seems that there are sets of contradictory measures, and then rather than moving forward, we are moving backwards. So there is all these dynamics, but overall, I think that experience over these last 20 years a very rapid progress in terms of decarbonizing and progressing in the clean energy transition year in. Then, in terms of the relationship, this is one of the last points, and I think this is a bit specific of China. When talk about the relationship in public and private sector, sometimes I prefer to say a relationship between the government, the public side as a regulator, and the public sector as companies, because all these companies are, of course, there's some private sector, and there's also a lot of investment that is international invested, and in that sense, there is from international participants in the economy, for example, via the chambers of commerce, American Chamber of Commerce, European Chamber of Commerce, Chamber of, just to give some examples. There is very good support in terms of the direction of decarbonizing the economy, in terms of moving towards climate neutrality, in terms of presenting solutions, technologies, innovation, cooperation. So recently, some of these chambers that I've mentioned released some reports that are available in the public domain that basically reiterate that intention of boosting action, and that the private sector, the international private sector that is present in China, is more than ready to be part of their journey and work side by side with the Chinese government. And the Chinese company also, we have had the opportunity to work with some sectoral associations, like sectoral associations from power sector, from iron and steel, from cement, etc., but also associations, environmental associations that gather different companies. And these associations have been also catalysts of change. And we have seen more action, particularly since the 2030, 2060 targets were announced. So there's more action in the member companies of those associations to align with the targets. And then I will stop my initial comments here, and of course, I'm very happy to take any questions from the other members of the panel or of those that are listening online. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renato. It was very interesting to hear from both of you, Renato and Lauri, so we can understand better the Chinese experience. I would like to invite to the floor Professor Eduardo Viola, who is an old partner from the institute here. Professor Viola researches and publishes in the academy, considering the themes of global governance, environmental and climate policy, international political economy. And so, Professor Viola, listening from Lauri and Renato presentations, we can see that China is a very unique experience with a lot of some contradictions, being the biggest emitter with 25% of greenhouse gases emissions in the world, but also investing a lot and very quickly in the solar and wide energy sectors, for example. And also, I would like to highlight the part of Lauri explanation commenting about the specific plans, local plans, and specific sectorial plans for different parts of our economy. So, Professor Viola, I would like to hear a little bit from you, some highlights from the presentation, and also if you want to make some questions or comments, considering Renato and Lauri presence here, it would be very great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Guilherme, for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And also, thank you very much to Lauri and Renato because of very, very interesting presentation. So, my view about China in the world and China in the global transition to a low carbon economy is a little different from you, particularly different from Renato. Okay, I have a more critical view of China. I would say more negative, that I would like to highlight as in order to people have a contrasting view. First of all, it's correct to say that China is greening to its economy, but it's not correct to say that China is in transition to a low carbon economy. Why? Because the China emissions has been as an average. We consider the emission from the year 2000 to 2019, China has produced every year, as an average, 62% of the global carbon emissions. And now, in the 20s, is emitting 20% of the global carbon emissions. Okay? So this is a very hard, consistent data that shows how China is not a responsible actor in the global arena. China maximize its national power, though it presents itself with a strong propaganda machine as a responsible developing country. Actually, China is a superpower competing for global hegemony with the United States. And today, China has per capita emissions that are higher than the global average and clearly higher than the European Union and the United Kingdom. So per capita income is already high middle income per capita income. So there is China's justification for having goals that, for example, to peak emissions before 2030. The justifications are completely inconsistent Okay, China is consuming very fast the global carbon budget. Okay, so I would say that so there is a significant and very with impact in the world development of low carbon energies. That's true. I am more impressed by nuclear development than by solar and wind. Why? Because in nuclear, China is following, in my opinion, the correct way. Okay, strongly developing nuclear energy that is key for many countries in the world. Okay, we have something similar, for example, in France. Okay, very different from the way of Germany, for example. Okay, so I think United States is starting to go also in the direction of giving importance to nuclear to the transition to a low carbon economy. So this process, I would say, the other thing that I think is very key is that there is, though the Chinese government is proposing a slow transition to a low carbon economy, but it's proposing without any doubt. I mean, but it's not now in the way to this process, because this is still continuous growing emissions by very, very huge amounts. Okay, so for example, let's remember that in the Copenhagen conference, China denies any commitment to peak emissions, and this was key for the failure of the Copenhagen conference in 2009. In 2015, China accepted, but 2030, when a responsible actor would have been accepting peak emissions around before 2020. Okay, very far away from what China was ready to do. And why this? Because here we have that the top priority of China is the priority of maximizing and consolidating and continuing the monopoly of power by the Communist Party. This is the two main goals of China are the power of the Communist Party, and in the perception of the Communist Party, you need to grow very fast economically for keeping high support of the population to the Communist Party and to the system of authoritarian political system. Okay, and the second one is growing power to become a global hegemon. Okay, so those are the goals. The goal of transition to a low carbon economy and to development a green economy are clearly subordinated to these two goals: of domestic power of the Communist Party and global power of the Communist Party and the Chinese state. Okay, so those are the points that I would like to emphasize in order to have a different approach that certainly is clearly different from Renato, but is a lot convergent with Lauri, and I don't know if he would agree with me in relation to this. And I would like to say also, for example, things that I disagree completely with Renato, that China is advancing to be a leader in global in green finance. If we consider what is the Belt and Road process and how is strongly based in is carbon intensive, strongly carbon intensive. This project. Okay, so where is the leadership? It's much more a discourse, okay, than a reality. Okay, and the other thing is about the acceptability of the goals of transition to a low carbon economy. There is acceptability in sectors of the population, I would say minoritarian sectors, because most of the population believes that the priority is to continue growing very fast, and not the transition, a more consistent transition to a low carbon economy. So I would say that I would finish saying that my approach is more critical, for sure, about China, but I have something you didn't talk about this, but it's interesting. I am seeing China much more positive than you both in nuclear energy, because you didn't mention the issue of nuclear energy, and in my view, is key to the global transition to a low carbon economy, particularly for Asian countries. So, in terms of remarking what is the positive dimension of China in this process, is the very sophisticated, consistent development of nuclear energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Viola. Very important remarks. I would like to give the floor for both of you, Lauri. I would say first Lauri and then Renato. Lauri, if you want to come and make some additional remarks. Renato also commented some parts of your presentation, so feel free to make some comments. And then next, I'll make some questions that are arriving here from the chat, and also Ricardo has one question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eduardo and Renato. I, in fact, found myself agreeing with most of what Eduardo was saying. I think it's more the moral standing that you take on it than the facts that we might have differed on. I completely agree that peaking emissions before 2030 is too late as a goal, and the goal should have been 2020. That would have been achievable. But it's important to note that China's emissions are coming down at the moment. They have been coming down since last summer. So there is a possibility that we have seen the peak. There is also a risk of another rebound in emissions. China is seeking power, seeking to increase its international standing, international strength and power, and of course also the Communist Party wants to stay in power. Absolutely. I think what climate leadership means is not doing things out of good heart. It means aligning your strategic goals and priorities with climate action. And so in that sense, whether or not we agree with China's geopolitical goals, the fact that they are increasingly pursuing those goals in a way that emphasizes these low carbon technologies and so on is positive. I spoke quite a bit about nuclear. I completely agree that nuclear, wind, and solar are all important in China's decarbonization strategy and the success of it. But if you look at the numbers, wind is already larger and solar is going to be larger than nuclear as a source of power generation very soon. And if you look at the projections from the leading Chinese research institutes that are charting the path, then wind and solar are more important, more significant in terms of the total power generation. And since I was talking about the latest policymaking, the really impressive developments in the past couple of years have been around those large-scale wind and solar developments and so on. But I think we probably don't disagree as much. With Belt and Road, yes, a lot of coal-fired power plants, oil and gas has been a part of the mix. The decision to ban new coal-fired power plants overseas as a part of the Belt and Road was a step in a better direction. And also recently, China has been quite proactive in the dialogue with African countries, in the dialogue with ASEAN, in starting renewable energy centers and efforts to establish more of a presence on renewable energy and so on. But we need to track the numbers and see how much of a shift there is. There is. It goes a bit beyond rhetoric. In terms of public acceptability, my contacts, my colleagues, my friends in China, I certainly have a sense that there's a lot of pride in this plan that that China has, especially in early 2020 when it was early 2021 when it was made a big public theme. One interesting thing is Eduardo said that he's not convinced because he thinks the Chinese public cares more about continued economic development, modernization, growth of consumption possibilities, and so on. I think that's absolutely for certain. What's interesting, if you look at the communication to the Chinese public from the Communist Party and from the government, what they emphasize is low carbon, zero carbon transition as a part of that successful modernization, as a part of becoming the successful modern socialist country that China wants to become. So none of it's not a message of degrowth or a message of downshifting. It's a message of pursuing economic success through these policies, and I think that does make a difference for the acceptance. If there was a situation where you really needed to compromise between economic growth or standards of material living and climate goals, then that would be a much tougher situation. But currently, I don't think that's the case.
Thank you, Lauri. Renato, if you would like to make some comments, I'll just ask you if you could do it soon, so we can do another round with some questions, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the comments of Professor Viola. I'll be brief on this. Just reacting to a couple of things. Want to clarify some points on this point of acceptability. I also, again, based on my experience and also what Lauri mentioned now, I have seen increasing acceptability, and I think at the moment being here is more than just pockets of acceptability. I think that because again it was not communicated to that this transition would come with costs that probably people are not willing to accept, and so they see that this transition can bring them benefits. So again, different sectors at the local government level, non-government organizations and companies, different sectors of society that I work with on a very regular basis, seem to be expressing that acceptability, and that's my basis for what I said before. On few other things, just to comment, I agree with what you said that 2030 and 2060 are definitely not ambitious targets. They could be much more ambitious. And when I was talking, I was mentioning about the process. And so that's in that context that I talked about the low carbon transition. So they have the target that is now set to 2060 to be carbon neutral. Is less. Definitely could be 2050, could be even earlier. In terms of peaking emissions, it's set at national level for 2030, but there are parts of China that already peaked. So there are different paces. And when I was saying that China is in a low carbon transition pathway, I'm not saying that China already achieved the goal. No, it's far from that. China and its role in the global globally should be able to do more, yes. Should be more ambitious, yes. But I see a lot of changes in the right direction in the last 5 or 10 years. That's what I want to signal. Also because Chinese economy is not growing at the pace that used to grow. The recovery of the COVID crisis, we don't know, because now we are having a take two of this COVID crisis here in China. There was this rebound of emissions associated with the first wave of COVID in China. So it didn't recover in the direction soon after the first COVID wave. And now we don't know what is going to happen. So what we have been working here is to try to promote the right tools to make sure that this time around China's recovery, because the Chinese economy has been areas of China in some economic centers paralyzed for several weeks and months, and this is affecting also the global economy. So it's important that the way the economy recovers is different from last time around. And in terms of China being having ambition to be a climate finance champion, I also agree that the Belt and Road itself, as it looks like today, is not an example of green investment or green finance. There are recent elements that demonstrate an intention to do that. And so I highlight the intention here because I think that, and this is based on also experience in the existing dialogues between China and UK government, and the UK is a global leader also in green finance, trying to move in that direction, because it's not just because in the past was not there that in the future can't be there. So I think that there is ambition, there is a driver. It's the same in the dialogue with the European Union, where there's current discussions related with the green taxonomy. So I think that it's important to create a new global level playing field, because if China continues financing the world in a way that it's not compatible, it's undermining other global interests and other global investments that go in that direction. It's canceling out those investments done in that direction. So that's what I wanted to point out. I think that sometimes because we talk here in different time scales, it might create the confusion that I was saying that China is already a leader on this, or China has already done the clean energy transition. Definitely not, far from that. Okay, I'll stop here, just reacting to these comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renato and Lauri, and also thank you, Professor Viola, for making some comments, and both of you answering and commenting after him. We're reaching our time planning here. I'd like to just make one question from the chat, and right after I'll give the floor to Ricardo so he can make one question also. One of the comments and questions here from the chat from Hamilton Carvalho, he asks, and I would like Lauri, if you could make some quick comments on that question. I believe you presented some of these aspects on your speech. What are the Chinese plans for the 4 pillars of our civilization that demand a huge amount of fossil fuels? You talked about sectorial plans and specific plans. Hamilton here is considering ammonia, cement, steel, and plastic. So he's asking about what are the plans for these 4 pillars of our civilization, as he wrote. Ricardo, could you please make your question also, and then we can give the floor for both Lauri and Renato to make so they can answer and make their final remarks, please.
Sure. So I think it's very interesting to think in Brazil from these different plans, the sector plans and the province plans, because we have a continental area with different challenges, and sectors with their specific challenges. It's also good to know that China brought the representatives and industrials to participate in the formulation of these plans, even to communicate or to to develop the plants. My question is, in Brazil, we have, for example, our energy. We have ethanol that all the chain, the chain of ethanol. It's a clean chain. We can say that. So we don't even need to electrify all our fleet. We have other challenges. So my question is, should we use our vocation and our infrastructure, or is that I'm not asking if we should have that, should do that, how China lead with that, using the vocation and infrastructure of the sectors or of the province, versus with the trade-off of not developing new innovation, not developing innovation to make it more green. It's very challenging to make a miner, to bring a miner to a green economic. I imagine. Another point is how to do that, how to bring the small producers, like even in the farms or in the green, the agribusiness, or in the industrial part, how to make it more inclusive for the small producers, even to achieve the green finance, as Renato said. In Brazil, we have a lot of small farmers, familiar farmers that have a difficult to access this green finance and the carbon credits market. So how China is leading with that? Is it clear? I'm sorry for my English here.
Very good. Should I go?
So, yeah, please, Lauri, and then Renato.
Okay. Yes, thank you. So the 4 pillars, as you phrased it, I think steel is clearly the biggest challenge. Steel is about a quarter of China's total emissions. There are the first pilots of hydrogen-based steel making, so hybrid steel in China. So the longer term thinking of shifting to making steel using green hydrogen from zero carbon electricity is there. However, over this decade, the big opportunity that China has is that the three-decade long construction boom is coming to an end. China has used half of the world's steel, mainly for construction. And now when that growth slows down, it means that there's starting to be a lot more scrap steel available from buildings that are being dismantled and from recycling of products and so on. And that means that China will need much less primary steel making from pig iron and can use more scrap, and that can deliver an up to 30% reduction in CO2 emissions over this decade. With cement, similarly, simply the fact that the construction volumes will come down means that cement emissions will go down even if you don't make dramatic changes in production technology. Currently, I don't know of a lot of work going into zero carbon replacements for cement. So that's probably currently a sector where CCS is thought of as the solution more than replacements. Ammonia is luckily very easy to make with electricity. So when you have ample zero carbon electricity, it's easy to make ammonia. There are, in fact, not in China, but in other Asian countries like Japan, there's already talk about producing ammonia in solar-rich regions like Australia and importing it into Japan. as a way of decarbonizing. With plastics, I haven't seen much, so it's not one of the sectors that has come up a lot. On the other question, first of all, I would say that biomass in the global picture is going to be incredibly valuable, and so probably using it for vehicles for private cars isn't going to be isn't going to make economic sense in the global picture. We need that for fuels or to achieve negative emissions, so using it in applications where we can use CCS and capture the carbon dioxide, and that can of course create economic value in Brazil as well. The question of how should how could you what could you take from the province and state-owned enterprise plans that China has is a very complicated one, because that's about political economy. I think the really key thing is somehow it's important to identify the economic advantages that different provinces have in the low carbon future, because that can really make the transition easier to manage. No province is going to accept a plan that just means that they get left behind economically. People will seek to move elsewhere if the perspective that they face is economic and demographic stagnation or decline. So there needs to be a perspective of this kind of economic opportunity for different provinces. With state-owned enterprises, it's trickier because some of them really identify as their core competence coal or oil or other sources. But I think at least looking at some of the plans that different Chinese state-owned enterprises have published could be interesting. And there are ways to transition. For example, oil companies have the best experts in drilling in the world, right? And drilling for geothermal, for other zero carbon applications is going to be a really key area. So when you think about what's the competence that different organizations have, and what's the opportunity that they have, I think there can be answers for a lot of players. For smaller producers, and smaller economic actors, that's really a global challenge. Definitely, I think for those sectors where there is a need for finance for specific purchases, like new types of devices, new types of farming machinery, or other applications, simply grants should definitely be considered if they are if the producers are not able to access banking. But of course, ideally, you would want to see both a push to increase the access to banking and loans, and having the green component integrated into that. I would maybe point to India as a country where there are more interesting examples of that, different kinds of lending initiatives that have enabled farmers to shift to, for example, avoiding crop burning, which is a big issue in that country. Thank you.
Thank, thank you very much, Lauri, for your answer and all your participation here at this seminar. Renato, please, if you want to answer or comment our last questions and also make your final remarks, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, in the interest of time, I will be brief on this comment. I think that the reply from Lauri is very good. I just like to add a few things. So on these four pillars, so indeed, the steel sector is a sector that is one of the sectors that is to be included in the national ETS, and that also, again, there is this aspect that Lauri mentioned in terms of future use of scrap steel might have a positive impact, and this inclusion of an emissions trading, particularly again from the later part of this decade, after 2025 towards 2030, they might start having an impact. So is a regulatory impact in the sector that we expect it can give. So we have been involved in work related with the development of benchmarks, sectoral benchmarks for the steel sector for the future allowance allocation. And that's one aspect that I would like to refer here to this sector in particular that is responsible for a significant percentage of China's emissions. Then on the plastic, also talking about plastic and the other resources related with the waste and waste management is also important aspect. There are some interesting developments here in terms of the way that China is starting to manage its own waste. And also China used to accept a lot of waste coming from abroad. Now they are refusing a significant part of that waste that used to arrive here. But I think it's important because the elements related with the circular economy are also moving up in the political agenda. So I think that it's important. For example, the way the single-use plastics, it's also important if you look upstream in the value chain, because the petrochemical sector also going to be included in the emissions trading system. There is also a possibility, again, via regulatory pressure coming from the design of the emissions trading, that also the production of new plastic will be. So these are two aspects that I would like to mention based on what was asked, specifically on the last question, and how to use existing structures. China tried to somehow create clusters in different regions and sometimes macro regions in a way to tap on the potential of those regions. What are the advantages, the competitive advantages that some of these regions have? What are the distinctive features of those regions? And so the way that they have been organizing those regions in sometimes groups of regions and provinces. So it's a very large scale. If we're talking about European scale, it will be several countries together. And also how they are organizing the related innovation systems in these provinces. So it's not about scrapping what existed before and leaving it behind and basically building brand new structures for the new economy, but there is an intention to try to, as I said before, to try to reskill some of these infrastructures and tap on some of this capacity. Of course, some capacity and some skills are harder to use in the future, and some skills that will be needed are not yet there and need to be obtained. But I think that is an interesting aspect of some of the local dynamics that are going on at the moment. Another aspect related with the small businesses and the access to finance, that's indeed an issue that I think is transversal to the global economy. There's also some projects now that are putting on some innovative grant facilities in a way, for example, to in a competitive manner to give access to grants and to some elements of green financing. The banks and the CBRC, the banking regulators, also working towards changing the banking landscape in terms of how they lend. And so I think that it's also quite. I was earlier today in another discussion precisely related with the development of a green taxonomy in the Chinese context that can be more aligned with the international standards and best practices. So I think that this will be key to unlock access to finance to these smaller businesses that sometimes don't have, or a lot of times don't have access to to financings, either credit or either way. Yeah, that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renato. I would like to thank very much Dr. Lauri Myllyvirta and also Renato Roldão, our two specialists that we are invited here for our seminar. It was very interesting to understand a little bit more of the Chinese experience. And before I gave the floor to my partner Ricardo to close this virtual seminar, I would like to give the floor for Viola, Professor Viola here, an old partner of our institute and who is collaborating with this project. The aim of this project is to think about Brazil, but to do that, we are preparing these seminars in order to know better other countries' experience. So, Professor Viola, if you want to make your final remarks, please.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that was very, very interesting for me. And after in the second round of talk by Lauri and Renato, I think it was more clear to me what I mean. I think with Lauri there is complete agreement in everything. And with Renato, there are some differences, but after the explanation he gave, I think the difference looks to me less strong than I was thinking before. So it's great. I mean, was another question that I would like to raise that probably Renato will have a lot of information. It's about the couch, about the carbon sequestration by China, because China is becoming a very, very top in the world in carbon sequestration for forestation and reforestation. Somehow like United States and Chile, okay? So this would be, but we didn't have time enough. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We can explore these questions and others eventually that people send to us in our chat during the next phase of this project. Thank you very much. Ricardo, you have the floor to close this seminar, please.
Sure. Thank you very much. Plenty of knowledge and new ideas from one-on-one. We would like to express our thanks to both speakers, Lauri Myllyvirta, yes, and Renato Roldão, as well as our mediator, Guilherme Checo, a good partner in this project. Last but not least, our thanks to Professor Viola, the specialist in this international climate agenda, who is long-time partner of the IDS and has been collaborating with the scope of this initiative. Thanks you to our team and all of you that watched this seminar, sharing your time to think with us how to develop a better Brazil. Thank you very much.
Bye.